So today I'm looking at a water block. It's actually a Chinese one I found on eBay. They are very cheap, but you may be surprised that they aren't that cheaply made. This one is by a company called Bykski or Bykski, however you want to pronounce that. This is a water block for an older socket. It's 1150, 1151 because of what I'm building over here. The box itself doesn't really say anything. It has Ice Dragon on there. I'm not sure what that means. They have their website here, which is bykski.com, and a QR code that, well, if you can figure that one out, it's probably the same website. Turn it around, nothing else. A little bit of colorful stuff. The model number itself is not listed anywhere in the box, like I was saying. Just a couple little marketing jargon at the bottom here. Inside, we have a Molex kind of rigged up LED thing. That there. We've got the typical mounting hardware for like a, well, typical water block. It's just springs and little clear plastic washers. Have the thumb screws and studs. Two separate pieces, they're just threaded lightly together. That will be for the hold down. We have a plastic backing plate, quite flexible. You can kind of see that there. Flexes fairly easily, but it's mainly just to add support. They actually took the time to route the access here, and this is just to clear the stock Intel backplate that holds the hold down bracket that's already on the board. And it also is supplied with generic thermal paste. I wasn't able to figure out what this is specifically. It's just something generic. I'm guessing silicone based. It's just has a gray color to it, which is fine. I guess if you need it, it's plenty to reassemble this a few times or use on other things that need thermal compound, obviously. But like I was saying, I have no information on this stuff. It literally says it comes with thermal grease. That's it. So if you don't have any, you've got plenty there. And then going down deeper into the box, we have the block itself, and for some reason they threw it in an anti-static bag. I'm not sure why they did that, but okay. Put this guy down here. The block itself, I'll take this guy out of here. You can see it's actually a decent design on it. It's all CNC routed. The bracket itself, right here, this is steel, decently thick. It does have, this whole piece actually has a decent heft to it. Everything is routed again with the CNC mill, I guess. Threads don't look bad. There's no sharp edges to speak of. Their logo down here is countersunk into the acrylic itself. Right there, you may be able to see a little bit of an edge. That is countersunk into this acrylic, and then beneath this is the model number, which they used some sort of a hot kind of a branding thing because it looks like this was melted in. It may have been milled, but it's a little sloppy. Model number for this one in particular is CPU-XPH-B. Hopefully that's a P or not an R. I can barely tell. Overall design, I like basically just the first appearance, especially because if you hear the price, this could be well worth it. Moving along, I guess, to the back side of this, you see how kind of the way they assemble it. We have the plate that contacts the die, and sandwiched between there is the steel and the acrylic top. So it's just three pieces just kind of smashed together. This is held in with nothing other than just the pressure of everything sandwiching in there. Because even if you look at where the studs in here, or the when they tapped the screws into the acrylic, the black part that you can see kind of around the edges here, I'll get some light on that, you can see where the steel stops. It's before the screws. So going back to the back, I was saying overall this isn't bad at all. The surface finish, it's pretty good. It's not the best. The edges have been kind of softened. The corners are slightly sharp. And the surface itself, they could have taken a little more time polishing this than what they did. You might be able to sort of see this. I mean, it looks pretty darn good. Yeah, there. Where the edges are a little shinier, but the center's kind of smudged looking. Now, if you listen to this, actually, this may even be able to focus on it. I kind of doubt it, though. Sort of. But basically, if I take my fingernail, you can kind of hear that. It's fairly rough. So if you want to take the next step in cleaning this up, which you probably won't need to, but some people like to get the absolute best thermals possible, you could go ahead and do the lapping process, which is kind of like rubbing compound and very, very fine wet sanding paper, and you kind of just smooth the entire surface until you can see your pretty face in there. So there's the back, kind of overall construction. It's alright. This is similar to an EK design, however the fin spacing inside is much larger, bigger gaps. The EK is very fine, almost hair fine. As far as how many fins is in there, I'm not going to sit here and count them, but you can see kind of how coarse the fins are. But like I mentioned EK before, it's a similar design. They are much more refined, but for the price, there's a reason why it's like this. Theirs is very fragile, so if you had to separate this block and so much as barely touch it, you're going to bend the crap out of them. These ones, I don't think you're going to bend that, unless you're like jamming a screwdriver in there. The inlet down here is kind of, you can see this sort of hollowed out space here. Right here in the center, there's kind of like a U shape. So the water is going in here and it's flushing down. These on the outer U, well, the middle U shape, that is just to block off the water, to force it from here to the outsides, and it gives you the most contact to move heat away from the center, which is center's where your processor is going to be. They do actively force it through these fins on either side, and this large U shape is obviously where the water comes out. But the EK one, what they do, on top of the really fine fins on there, so they have many more and they're a lot closer together, they have a plate that goes in here. So instead of this, you can see how wide that is. The water will actually travel through this large area and go through. The EK has a plate that goes in there, and there's just a small slit down the middle, so it pushes water exactly in the center, and then it will travel out to the outside, similar to what this is doing. But the way they have it set up, it's actually more efficient in removing heat than a design like this. This will do it. I don't see why it wouldn't. I don't have a custom loop set up, or my water pump actually isn't even set up to run a test for this. First impressions, okay, the price. This was under $40 shipped, and I'm sure you can find them slightly cheaper if you dig, but for the price, this has a good weight to it. It looks like a premium build. It does have the kind of characteristics of something that could be over $100, $150. So if you aren't worried about giving up a few thermals, just on a tight budget, want to try out custom loops for your first build, this is actually going to be my first custom loop because I've always used AIOs. So speaking of AIOs, the backplate on here, even though it is kind of a flimsy plastic, I'll give you a comparison off of the Corsair H100i GTX that I am removing. Okay, here's the one that Corsair supplies. Theirs is actually a thinner plastic, but since it's a multi-socket, you can actually move these little tabs to fit different processors. So if you do end up with one of these guys, it looks like you're going to be very limited to what range of sockets you'll be able to fit this. Even though these are slotted right here. I guess I can show you on the Corsair. It appears, okay, you may be able to adapt this to the other ones. Since the Corsair does have these adjustable tabs, if you were to get a similar back plate like this one, and push that towards the outside. I'm not sure what socket that applies to, but you can see this will still accommodate that since these are ovaled. So I guess you do have an option to do this a little bit differently. Not sure what the H100i, its wider setting is for. Looks like they have it marked 75 and 80, I'm guessing millimeters coming across here. So depending on what that other option is, if you had a different backplate, you could technically use this on that other socket that this one's technically not compatible for. The last thing, let's take a board and just kind of show you how it looks going on. There's a little ITX board. So the plastic backplate, you've got this little T kind of cut out in the middle there, right? Now that's going to basically give clearance for these guys here. We have these 3 threads sticking out. If I set this on here, you see it just gives enough clearance for these to stick through. Just leaving it flush protects it pretty well. Flipping it over. There we go. And obviously thermal compound, I'm not going to do that just to drop this on here. And rotate this any way you want. I'm just going to be, which way is facing you? This way? Something like that. And those boards backwards. Those are decent clearance. I would watch for this also, just checking this out. These capacitors right here, it does kind of overlay those. So if you have some high capacitors or components that are close to your socket, watch out for that because we are overlapping a few things down here, mainly these little metal caps. If these were maybe, they still have some decent clearance. I'd say we probably have 2 millimeters before we're going to start contacting, so you may have to watch those as far as clearance. And these are kind of a funky shape, but they should be within spec of what the socket requires a cooler to clear. You may just run into clearance if you have a unique board or is reworked or something along those lines. So the socket on there, I mean, those can stay there. I'm not going to screw it down. So the last thing will be this guy, LED, and this physically just jams in this hole they drilled in it, like so. I've got a test power supply over here, so let's grab some power leads. Good enough. Alright, so the LED supplied, it's just kind of a basic LED. It looks like it may have a cob in there, which is slightly more powerful than just a cheapo LED, but LEDs are cheap regardless. On this heat shrink side here, there's a resistor. So you can run this LED from, it's up to 12 volts. So you can actually, if you want this dimmer than full blast all the time, which I'll turn in a second, you can make it less bright just by dropping it down to 5 volts. 3.3, you barely can't see it. So let me kill these lights and we will turn this on. I'll start at 3.3 just so it's dim. So hang on a sec. Alright, lighting at 3.3 volts. I have to turn off more lights. This is pretty bad. There you go, now you can't see anything. There we go, that may help. So there we are at 3.3, kind of gives a subtle glow. You can just kind of see the basic routing of this. It actually in person looks a little bit darker than what this is picking up. I guess I made it a little too dark in here. Next, let's go to 5 volts. A little brighter. Right now it's more of a subtle glow in person. This is if you don't want something blaring, but you do like to see something lit up in there. 5 volts would probably be one of the better ones, which 5 volts you can technically pull off of your power status LED, whatever it is on these. It's got the pinout down there. You could take this, if you know how to solder, you can just take these, put a 2-pin harness on it. Do it for that. And 12 volts would be if you actually hooked up this ghetto Molex. Nice and shiny. Get these lights back on. So there we are. It's 12 volts right there. You see, with all my crazy lights on, you can barely see what's going on here. So I guess the last thing, other than this being cheap, would I recommend this? First impressions, regardless of the not perfect back right here that's going to contact your CPU, if that was more of a cleaner finish on the back and they polished it a little better, I could probably recommend this more. One last thing, which I mentioned earlier, until I get water flowing through here, I want to see if I can pressurize this more than what a normal water cooling loop would put into here. For one reason, I want to see if this will leak. So until I do a full leak test to see if there's a failure rate, if the O-ring split, if something's not sealed properly, I can't 100% recommend this. However, I'm guessing you'll be fine, but that's always why they tell you to set up your loop, power the loop, let it run overnight, 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever you want, and check for leaks. Make sure you run these, because the last thing you need is this little guy with a little leak going all over everything. And guess what? You get to rebuy all of this. Or if you have a vertical case, generally your power supply is on the bottom these days, so you get water into your power supply. So now you can replace this and your power supply. Oh yeah, this is actually the bottom of the board. You can take out your graphics card. Be careful. 90% of the time, you're fine. Just don't toss it in there and just guess. So I would recommend this. Where I found this was just eBay of all places. So you can find these pretty easily if you just know where to look. Like I said, this one is for the LGA 1150 and 51 sockets. This is an old, I think this is 2nd or 3rd gen i5 that's in there. This will fit this, and we also discovered with a different backing plate, you may be able to fit a different socket. So that's an option. The one that comes with it's decent. All the parts were decent. This is probably the worst part. This little rigged up light. Thermal compound, I don't see why you can't use it. It's just, it's an unknown. We don't know what that is. eBay, there's Alibaba, I think is what it's called, or AliExpress. Is that right? Something like that. They carry these. I think, don't quote me on this, but the I believe Performance PCs may have this. I kind of doubt it though, or they have one that's similarly named. But if you need a cheap cooler, I can't comment on the cooling capacity of this, how it actually performs, because I don't have it set up yet. But from first impressions, for 40 bucks, if it doesn't leak, this should be fine. So that's kind of like my quick overview. I will follow up with this once it's assembled, attached to that, and has a loop on it, which may be a little while because I'm still building the case from scratch. So until then, I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.